This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
Our initial Big Ten football preview for 2019 is next on Michigan Podcast.
But there's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deep for Anthony Clark. Waits for it. Hit. Caught.
This is no time for that. In the pocket and a sack. Tim Jamison.
Brady gets terrific. Throws it and a touchdown. Knight again. Schultz just before Brazil got him. And a leaping interception by Woodson.
Harbaugh back to throw over the middle. Caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet. Touchdown, Michigan. On its way. It's good.
He's 5'7", 179 pounds, a junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris packs a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming. Second. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic.
Option. And Robinson calls his own number, and he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Robinson and Michigan.
Win it. We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again. Michigan.
Go Blue, I'm Steve Deace. Welcome to this week's episode of Michigan Podcast. My buddy, Michael Spath from WTKA in Ann Arbor and the Wolverine Digest will be joining us a little bit later on. We'll talk some Big Ten basketball as well as Chris Evans. And will he indeed be back from academic suspension in time for the 2019 football season? But that's where we will begin here first. That's right. With recruiting now done, both signing days behind us, as well as we have a definitive list of who went pro and who's coming back, who's in the transfer portal and who's not. Now is a good time to take our first look, because we have our first glimpse at the rosters for all of the teams in college football for this fall, starting with the Big Ten. And I want to begin by showing you these are our initial Big Ten football power ratings for 2019. You're going to see scores next to those teams. I'm going to explain to you what those mean here in a moment. But you see Ohio State is number 1, followed by Michigan. Michigan State is 3rd. Iowa is 4th. Nebraska 5th. Penn State is number 6. Purdue is 7. The next group is Maryland, Minnesota, Indiana. Look at Wisconsin down there in 11th place. Illinois, Northwestern in 13th place. Rutgers in 14th place. So let me tell you how this works. So teams are awarded points per player based on the 24/7 composite recruiting rankings of the last 4 classes. So for this study, that's 2016 through 2019. The way that works, you get 5 points for a 5-star, 4 points for a 4-star, etc. All right. The last transfer in and out information is also included in these numbers. So yes, Justin Fields is included in Ohio State's score. For example, he gave them 5 points for being a 5-star that transferred in. So he is included in those points. If a player has clearly played above his recruiting ranking, you see this at a school like Wisconsin or Michigan State a lot that are more developmental programs where they coach those guys up. Then I raise him a star, and thus his team gains more points accordingly. That's up to a 5-star. Nobody goes higher than that. And then for fifth-year seniors, they are only counted in, because a lot of programs don't use them a lot nowadays. Fifth-year seniors are only counted in if they definitely factor in to the depth chart. So now that you know how we got those scores, let's show the Big Ten football power power ratings, our initial ones for 2019. Now that you've seen how we got those scores, let's take a look at 2019 again. And what you're going to see, for example, is these things, there's a tiering process. You see Ohio State and Michigan are what you would call dynamic recruiters. Penn State's in that group as well, but when you've got 12 kids in the transfer portal, that really hurts your overall depth and score. And then you see Michigan State, Iowa, Purdue. These are now more of your developmental programs. Maryland just got a big 4-star recruit, so you can add 4 points to their score. Wisconsin is updated with the offensive lineman that just retired for them. So this is where, you can see Northwestern's in 13th place, but you can see that coaching can make up, a 10, 25 point difference in overall roster talent between, say, a Northwestern and a Minnesota. And we saw that last year when Northwestern won the Big Ten West for the first time. So to give you some perspective on this, I did this for my 2018 college football preview. If you got that, you saw these numbers, the final preseason roster numbers. Here's what those were last year. All right, so you can see Ohio State's had some attrition, for example. You really see Penn State's attrition. You see Wisconsin is way up at 4th. We'll talk about them more in a minute, but their point total isn't that much different than it was a year ago. So you're going to notice that some of these teams are a lot higher scoring than they were in 2018. Well, let's get to some news and notes on these that explain why that's the case. If you look at schools like Purdue, Minnesota, Indiana, Illinois, and Rutgers, those are all schools that have undergone recent coaching changes, so they're finally building some depth after recent coaching turnover, and that's why those numbers are higher. There's always a lot of turnover, transition. When a new coach comes in, you have more full recruiting classes, so your overall depth is getting better. If you look at Wisconsin's talent score, it's only about 12 points lower than last year. The problem for Wisconsin is the rest of the Big Ten West is kind of caught up to them. Now, the Badgers do have 90 roster points from players with senior eligibility. That is the most in the league. Iowa was well over 300 points until they had several players declare early for the NFL draft. Michigan State is finally digging out from that disastrous 2016 recruiting class. They had so many off-the-field problems with that class. It was decimated. Sparty will have much more depth next season. I think two teams that whose rosters seem better poised to compete for championships in 2020 are Nebraska in the West and Penn State in the East. But I will say, when you look at Nebraska's schedule for 2019, even if the roster is still a year away, I could see them having a schedule that allows them to compete as soon as this fall. Ohio State has one 4-star recruit scheduled to go on a 2-year church mission instead of enrolling in school this season, so he is not currently included in this assessment. And Michigan is still several scholarships over the limit for 2019 if you put the kickers on scholarship, and I've got to think Jake Moody, Will Hart will be. So if you put them on scholarship, I could see Michigan still needing to lose about another 10 to 12 roster points via needed attrition this offseason. And Michigan's not alone. There are several schools that are a few scholarships over the limit right now, and we'll see some needed attrition as well. And you'll see those scores come down between now and when camp opens up in late July. But for now, you've got your first look at who's got the highest potential ceilings in the Big Ten Conference. And you can see Ohio State is still clearly the class of the league, but the gap between them and everybody else is closing, especially now the coaching gap without Urban Meyer. And we'll see how much Ryan Day can continue the historic success that Urban Meyer had at Ohio State when the Buckeyes take the field this fall. Thank you to all of you that are supporting us here on Patreon. We get asked frequently, hey, what can we do to support what you guys are doing here at Michigan Podcast? And one of the best ways to do that is to support us with a very inexpensive nominal contribution at Patreon. And as you can see, throughout the course of the year for our Patreon supporters, we do give you exclusive content we don't offer anywhere else, just as a way of saying thank you. So to all of you that have supported us throughout the year at Patreon, thank you. Thank you in advance to those of you who are willing to sign up and do so in the future, and go blue. All right, back here on Michigan Podcast and rejoined by our good friend Michael Spath from WTKA in Ann Arbor and the Wolverine Digest. Good to see you, Michael. How are you, man?
I'm doing great, guys. Surviving this blustery, cold snow, ice, sleet. I don't know how it is in Iowa, but it's terrible here in Michigan.
It's brutal. It's the most brutal winter we've had here in several years, and it's about to break me. I got to be honest.
Yeah.
The snowflakes are turning me in to a snowflake, Michael. I cannot even much longer. So let's talk about something far more glorious. Let's talk some Michigan basketball. Wolverines are taking on Penn State tonight. At the same time, an interesting juxtaposition. You're going to have Purdue on the road at Maryland. As it stands now, it's the last remaining road game against a ranked team that Purdue has left. But as we're learning, there are no gimmies on the road in this league anywhere this year. Michigan State will be taking on Wisconsin at the Kohl Center on the road as well. So this could be the night when we're sitting here a month from now and the final standings are determined, Michael. We might look back on this evening and the way it turned out as sort of where things were really began to get etched in stone here. Your thoughts?
No, I agree. And I think when you look at it, I mean, if you're a Michigan fan, you've got to be rooting your ass off for Purdue to lose tonight to Maryland, because you just mentioned, I mean, their schedule the rest of the way is not very daunting. And yeah, it's possible that they lose a game to Ohio State or to Indiana here or there, maybe even Northwestern at the end of the season. But let's face it, I mean, they're not playing Michigan anymore. They're not playing Maryland. They're not playing Michigan State. They're not playing Wisconsin. Those are the four of the best teams in the Big Ten the rest of the way here. And so this isn't a critical game for Purdue to lose and for Michigan to get a little bit of breathing room, because you know what, even the most ardent Michigan fan would have to admit that when you look at the rest of their remaining schedule, 2 games on the road against top 20 teams in Maryland and Michigan State. They have to play both those teams at home. They have to play Minnesota on the road. When you look at their final 7 games, I mean, if they go 5-2 in these last 7, I would consider that a huge success for the Wolverines. 5-2 in their last 7, if Purdue doesn't lose tonight, probably leaves you in second place in the Big Ten. And so it's a critical night tonight. It's big for Michigan, obviously, to get the win, but it's just as big for Purdue to get the loss tonight, or really Michigan's going to have to play perfect basketball down the stretch here.
I think after tonight, depending on how things work themselves out, the rest of Michigan's schedule would be considered a quad 1 win after this game against Penn State tonight. And there have been times Penn State would have been considered a quad 1 win. I think they're around 76th in the net rankings right now. So that's pretty close to them, because I think it's top 70 wins on the road are considered a quad 1. So that, I mean, they're just on the outside of being a quad 1 win. So that kind of goes to the strength of Michigan's schedule down the stretch. I want to look back at the Wisconsin game on Saturday. And, you know, Michigan ends up, it's funny that I'm listening to a lot of national shows, and, you know, the narrative is beginning, you know, I really thought Michigan was good at the beginning of the year. They're really not that good. They still have an amazing record against the spread. They actually covered the number against Wisconsin, and that was a game where they were 0 for 10 in the second half from 3. If they were just 2 from 10, which is brutal, they'd have won the game by double digits. But there's a lot being said about this game from fans around the conference about Wisconsin's style of play. And you know, this, of course, began with, you know, Brad Davison, who's a very good player, by the way. But, you know, in his flopping and some of his hijinks, it was highlighted by his attempt to, I don't know how else to describe it. I watched it happen live. It looked like he was trying to injure Jordan Murphy. I don't know how else to describe what that play was. Then we had a couple of nut grabs, and then one against Marquette that's on film that Doug Gottlieb is sharing. He had the nut grab against John Teskey in our game. I thought Ethan Happ had the always tricky throat punch method of boxing out Jordan Poole. Maybe they teach that in East Lansing where they're tougher, but I'm pretty sure Coach B doesn't necessarily teach that. He's fairly fundamentally focused. What do you make of what's going on with Wisconsin basketball? Is this a situation where someone at the league office needs to call down to the coaching staff there and Coach Guard and say, hey, you guys need to fix this internally, because if you keep up with this, someone's just going to jack one of your guys right in the face for messing with them like that?
You know, it reminds me a little bit of when Brett Bielema was the coach at Wisconsin football. And I'm sure, Steve, you're very well aware of the times when, you know, players like Steve Breston and Denard Robinson would complain that guys were grabbing ankles underneath the pile and grabbing face masks and going with that extracurricular stuff. And, you know, I don't know. I would hate to, you know, just stereotype Wisconsin as like this program that likes to take liberties. And certainly the last couple of years underneath Wisconsin, you didn't see it as often. But this year, you're right. I mean, there's enough examples of it. And I don't know if it's just this idea of they're trying to play. I think about a little bit like Purdue football this past year. And the defense coordinator's name escapes me from Purdue, but they were trying to play with aggression.
Nick Holt, right?
Yeah, there you go. And he wanted to establish this identity, and they end up going too far, and it actually cost him a couple of those early games. Eastern Michigan was one of them. The game against Northwestern was likely one of them that cost him. And I wonder if Greg Gard has kind of been building this mentality of similar to Michigan. We've got to have this great defense. In order to have this great defense, we got to play physical. We got to play tough. We got to do all these different things. And that can kind of get lost a little bit in what the idea of toughness is. I think so often people associate toughness with physicality. And pushing guys around and getting in people's faces. And I don't think of toughness like that. I think of toughness as mental toughness. I think of toughness as when you're down on the road, can you handle that? What happens if you lose your lead? If it's late in the game, how do you handle that situation? I also think about it underneath the post, that you are not getting boxed out so easily, and that people are not shoving you around. I get that some of it's physicality, but I think Wisconsin has taken it to mean like we've got to assert ourselves as the bully on the court. And that's not what toughness is. That's just being a bully, and that's just being outside of the frame of what the rules are. And so, yeah, Greg Gard's got to get under control. I don't know that I've seen anything so incredibly – I mean, I do think that Davison, where he was trying to trip Jordan Murphy, was very bad. In this game, the Ethan Happ forearm shiver to Jordan Poole was not a good look. But I don't think we've seen anything that's so egregiously blatant yet that I think the Big Ten office needs to call Greg Gard and say enough with this. This is getting out of hand. But I do think that we're probably on that edge right now, Steve. And if they don't come through, or if Greg Gard doesn't do something, then you very well could see that punch, that kick to the groin, that Grayson Allen move. Let's face it, that's what we're all comparing them to. And I think that we're getting closer to a Grayson Allen moment for this Wisconsin basketball team.
I mean, Brad Davis is a guy that we offered. He's a good player. I mean,
he had a couple shots on Saturday that were incredible.
No doubt. And you can tell that some memo has gone out. Because I thought there were two, at least one for sure, where he had drawn a charge on Jordan Poole and got no call at all, or the call went back on him as a block. So I think now the karma's starting to kick in here a little bit, and the word has gone out, and now he's not getting calls. In fact, the calls are going the other way, and it's starting to hurt his team a little bit. And I kind of want to hope that the Badgers correct this, because they're playing a big game for us tonight against Michigan State. Let's get back to talking about our team. And the way Charles Matthews took over that game on Saturday, and he has not shot well. He made the huge shot that beat Minnesota, and really for the last couple of weeks, other than that, has not shot well. I thought he was brutal in the first half of this game, and it's something I've heard you say on your radio show, though, a lot, which is under Coach Beilein, you just can't write anybody off. I mean, we were sitting there in the first half, and Matthews, I was about ready to tweet, February is just not the month of Matthews. And then you saying that on your show rang in my ears, and I thought, nah, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to fall for the banana in my tailpipe. I'm not doing it again. I've done it before. I've made a clown out of myself. I'm not doing it again. All right. And so I said nothing. And then by the time we got to the end of the game, the guy had raised my T level a good 20 points with the way he took over there at the end. That last shot that he hit, and where he is at his best, this is a lost art in college basketball. I think it is what Michigan State's missing with Langford not coming back. He's this kind of player for them. Is so many guys in college basketball today do one of two things, and the great players do them both, which is great perimeter shooters or they attack the rim. But that in-between area where a lot of money is made in the NBA, frankly. That 14 to 18 foot range, particularly if you can clear yourself out space with a fadeaway without, sticking that arm or that elbow out there. That is how Charles took control of this game, and that really is his game, and that's when he's at the best, I think.
Well, I think to start with your first point about not writing players off, I think the lesson that you've learned from Beilein and where I come is, I'm okay mentioning that Jordan Poole is slumping as a shooter. I'm okay mentioning that Charles Matthews is slumping as a shooter. I'm okay mentioning that Iggy Brosdakis just never wants to see Wisconsin ever again. 2 points in two games is well below what he's capable of. But I think there's a difference between saying that those guys are slumping or those guys are going through tough moments and then writing them off and saying, well, they're not coming back from this. And that's the one thing I won't do with a John Beilein player is I won't say that someone's ever so far gone that they're not coming back from it. And even John Teskey or Xavier Simpson, two guys that are in their junior year, 2 years ago, we looked at them as two players that had no role on these Michigan basketball teams. John Teskey looked like, completely overwhelmed in every situation he was in. He looked worse than a JV basketball player suiting up for the varsity in the championship game and having no idea what he's doing out there. And so, to see where he's come in those 2 years, and Xavier Simpson, a guy that couldn't shoot the ball very well, didn't have any type of role on this team 2 years ago, and now is arguably their most important player. And so I don't ever, at least nowadays, over the last 2 years, I've learned my lesson. I won't sit there and go like, well, this guy is no good for Michigan anymore. Or this guy can't be a contributor for Michigan anymore. I'm just not going to do it. And so I would encourage all those fans out there not to tweet something like that because you'll end up making a fool out of yourself. The second part of it, the Charles Matthews part of it, I really like when he gets into that, out on the wing and he's deep enough, close enough to the basket where he's not starting 25 feet away or 20 feet away. He's starting about 8 to 10 feet away, and he's starting with that back down. Where he's pushing the guy back a little bit, is using his butt, and he gives him three options. And when he was on his game on Saturday in the second half, all three options worked. One of them is that he can do that fadeaway, the Akeem Olajuwon, the dream fade, right, where he turns to his right and hits that shot that's so hard to block, so hard to defend because he's falling away from you. The other one is that he comes back, the shot that he made at the end of the game, which he comes back he turns left, he goes into the key, and he hits another kind of fadeaway, or he just goes up with a jump shot. I prefer to see him go up with a jump shot at that point than do a fadeaway because that he's going up with some confidence. He doesn't have to get it over his guy. And then the third one is that he can turn to his left and he can drive to the basket, which we saw a little bit of on Saturday too. So there's three options out of getting him the ball on the wing right there. And so I think that's a great place for him to start. And I would hope that honestly, there's too many times where Charles Matthews feels uncomfortable is when he's at the top of the key and he's asked to create on his own. He can get to the basket every once in a while, but most of the times that he gets the basket, he's coming from the sidelines. He's coming from the wing position, and that's when he's getting a step on a guy and getting in for a dunk. When he's at the top of the key, he's not comfortable enough handling the ball where he can beat a guy off the dribble and get to the basket without those other guys sliding in and stopping him. And so give him the ball on the wing, let him get going early. But I think the incredible thing about this team is that nobody seems to be afraid to be the guy in crunch time. But at the same time, nobody has really developed that go-to guy. That's something we talked about on the show earlier this week, and I know you're listening to. Is it nervous energy for Michigan fans that they don't have that go-to dependable rock, or is that good that they don't necessarily have at this point so far needed that guy?
So Jordan Poole reminds me so much of where Charles Matthews' ebb and flow was a year ago. And Matthews got off to the great start. I recall the game against UCLA where they had the huge comeback and they had the timeout, and Beilein famously basically said to Matthews, hey, you've been the best player for UCLA on the court so far tonight. Why don't you try being the best blankety blank player for us the rest of the game? And then he went out there, took over the game. And then there was this moment where he almost became too self-aware. And this is where you have the fine line, I think, between being the go-to guy and hero ball. And if you go back and watch last year where he hit the wall late January into February, you could almost count. And you mentioned Charles Matthews at the top of the key. If he took more than 2 or 3 dribbles off the top of the key, just get back on the other end and play defense. All right. A turnover or a brick is a coming. And now I kind of feel this way with Jordan Poole. He got off to a phenomenal start. He was actually shooting well over 50% from 3 until a few weeks ago. And I think, the game against Wisconsin, they lost in Madison, where he was the one guy that was being aggressive offensively, and it worked for a bit. But then I kind of feel like it's incentivized some of his worst instincts now. And it's almost like watching Matthews a year ago. If Jordan Poole is at the top of the key or 3 to 5 feet outside the 3-point line and dribbles more than 2 or 3 times, just box out or get down to the other end and play defense. I kind of feel that he's kind of hit the wall a little bit, trying to find the fine line between go-to guy and hero ball that, Matthews had to figure out midway and until late of last season. What do you think?
Well, you know what? I think of hero ball, and I think because people ask all the time, well, what's the difference between hero ball and what Charles Matthews did on Saturday? And to me, hero ball is taking the ball at the top of the key and trying to create something that you're not good at. Charles Matthews is not good 3-point shooter, and he's not a good off the ball dribbler. Jordan Poole is a great 3-point shooter, but not like he's a really good 3-point shooter when he catches and shoots, and and not when he has to make a crazy move and kind of an Allen Iverson crossover and get the guy to fall down. Sure, that looks great on highlights, but when he has the ball, and as you said, he's dribbling 2 or 3 or 4 times, and he's just trying to make a guy miss and make a guy miss and make a guy miss, that's when I'm realizing, okay, here's him playing hero ball. I think when you play within your own strengths, and that for Jordan Poole is getting the basket, that for Jordan Poole is catching a pass, being in position at the 3-point line and hitting a 3-pointer. That for Isaiah Livers is catching the ball and being in position as a 3-pointer. That for Xavier Simpson, hero ball for Xavier Simpson is when he takes those step-back 3-pointers, or in the game against Wisconsin, we saw him take a 3-pointer from well outside the key. That's a hero ball moment for Xavier Simpson because it's not what he does well. What he does well is get to the basket and throw up that crazy hook shot that we all love to see, or get a layup. So that's not hero ball when he's doing that. And so that's where I draw this distinction. And when it comes to Jordan Poole, if you went back and tracked say he takes 10 shots a game, I think 4 or 5 of them are really good shots. And I think 4 or 5 of them are pure crap.
Yep.
And it's like watching like a kid that's just learning how to play basketball, and they think that every shot is a good shot. And that's just not the case. And I don't know how John Beilein sits there on the bench. I mean, he's talked about giving Jordan Poole latitude because you have to give him latitude. He's that type of player. But the balancing act that John Beilein has to do with Jordan Poole, and that I think we're all kind of living it right now because, you go back and watch that Wisconsin game, and I thought he was terrific in the first half, and then he takes a bad shot, but then he has a couple moments in the second half, and then there's just some really, really ridiculous shots that you're screaming at your television because and that's a maturity thing, and hopefully he'll outgrow it. I don't know. The question is whether he'll outgrow it in a Michigan uniform next year or he'll outgrow it in an NBA uniform down the road here.
Final thing, let's switch gears. A football question. This news has broken since last week's episode and since we talked to you previously a couple weeks ago, and that is Chris Evans is right now not a part of the football program, but enrolled in school. There hasn't been any confirmation other than it's not football related, but if you do the math, it appears to be an academic violation of some kind, and the kind that probably requires you to have crossed this line on more than one occasion for it to get to this point. He's heading into his senior season. When you look at those sorts of suspensions, particularly when you get outside, not that the football program, Harbaugh has actually ran a pretty tight ship with off the field issues at Michigan, but you also are going to have to balance your desire to get a guy on the field, to get his debt paid. When you get into the academic side of things and those kinds of people, they're not necessarily as concerned about that. I don't think right now we can count on Chris Evans being a member of the 2019 Michigan football team. That's my first question to you about this. And then the part 2 is I did our latest roster update at Wolverine Digest for the 2019 team. And, when I look at almost every position, even defensive line, we're acting like they're really low there. They still got 13 guys there. There's still a pretty good amount. There's 10 teams in the Big Ten would love to go into camp with 13 highly recruited or proven defensive linemen to figure out a lineup from. But when you look at running back, you're looking at a depth chart now, converted walk-on True Wilson, redshirt freshman Christian Turner, redshirt freshman Hassan Haskins, true freshman Zach Charbonnet. I think you'll see Michael Barrett or maybe somebody else eventually move to that position as well. But that position on what's overall a fairly experienced team coming back, this could be the rawest running back depth chart I can ever remember as a Michigan fan. Michael, your thoughts?
Yeah, I would probably compare it maybe a little bit to when Mike Hart took over, right? Because when Mike Hart took over, you had 2 true freshmen, and Mike Hart and Max Martin. I think Jerome Jackson was a sophomore without a ton of experience, and I think that you had David Underwood, who was your legitimate your big name guy, and he had been a backup to Chris, remember correctly, to Chris Perry. Mm-hmm. So that's where I look at it back. Maybe that or 2008 when you had Carlos Brown. Brandon Minor, but even those guys that played some, and you had Sam McGuffey starting as a true freshman with Mike Shaw and all that. So, yeah, I look at it, and it's a unfortunate situation because offensively Michigan is loaded at wide receiver. Even with the departure of Zach Gentry, they're loaded at tight end. This is the best quarterback depth that Michigan has had in 20 years. Offensive line,
16 scholarship offensive linemen now. Yeah,
4 or 5 offensive line starters are back. I mean, this looks really good. I will say this is I do agree a little bit with the idea that can you be if you lose Chris Evans, what do you lose? Because he's been a player that's been wasted so far in his Michigan career. I look at it a little bit of like what you could be getting from Chris Evans this year underneath Josh Gaddis, and that excited me. But I also know that it's not like you're losing a 1,000-yard back. You're not losing a guy that caught 500 yards in receiving. You're not losing a guy that has is an all Big Ten performer. And so there's a little bit of that. But yeah, if you're losing Cron Higdon and Chris Evans in 1 year, that's a blow to Michigan. And I don't know what the answer is. I don't think True Wilson is ready to be the number one go-to guy the entire season. I don't think, I didn't see enough out of Christian Turner, Zach Charbonnet. There's a lot of people that responded to me on Twitter about this and well, Zach Charbonnet is going to rush for 1,000 yards. I mean, the last true freshman running back that rushed for 1,000 yards for Michigan, I believe, was Mike Hart. It's only happened, once in the history of Michigan football that someone's gotten to 1,000 yards. I think Ricky didn't quite get there. I know there's, more and more freshmen are playing, but it's just unfortunate because otherwise across the board, you're so loaded on the offense and you don't want this to be a weakness. And maybe the hope is that with a really strong offensive line, you can plug somebody in there and they can get the job done. That is the hope. But I'll say this right now, Steve, because I know that you and I are in the same boat with this. I'm not looking at this and going, well, this is the excuse. Because every year there's been an excuse for Michigan football, why they can't, why they haven't been able to beat this team, why they haven't been able to beat that team, why can't they win a Big Ten title? Every year it's something else. I'm not looking at this. There's no more excuses.
Agreed.
You're in year 5 of your program. If you lose a running back like this, well, guess what? You need to have the depth. You need to have recruited well enough that losing one player doesn't capsize your season here.
No, with the offensive line depth they have coming back, that receiver group that they have, I think it's actually the deepest and most talented receiver group at Michigan I can maybe ever remember. When you look at the 11 guys they've got on scholarship there right now, and you mentioned the quarterbacks, and now you got the new OC coming in, and with hashtag speed and space, and it's funny watching him go online and continue Josh Gaddis to assert it's my offense. I almost get the sense he just keeps resetting things like he's laying a marker, like a dog marking his territory, almost as if, hey, in case coach starts thinking separately, well, here's the reality. We don't really have the experience and depth to run the offense that Jim ran last year. We're going to have to let Shea play an offense much more similar to the one he had at Ole Miss. And now he's got the weapons and I think the pass pro to do it. I agree with you. There are no excuses. If Shea Patterson, whoever it ends up being, if he gets hurt and it's somebody else, if they aren't making an assault on Michigan's single-season passing records this year, then I think that's a fail, in my opinion, because I think that's the kind of talent we have coming back. And when you look at our schedule, you don't see a lot of teams with a lot of really strong secondaries on that schedule either. There's no reason whatsoever that this would not be a much more wide-open offense next year. Michael, I'll give you the last word.
Yeah, I mean, I think you made some comment that if Michigan won 10 games in a row last year, you're going to get a tattoo, which I don't think you ever did, Steve.
I did. I did own up to it. Yes, I did. That episode is, I did get my I Love Jimmy tramp stamp. That episode is right here on our YouTube channel. Yes, it is. Yes.
Okay.
I'm a man of my word. Yes.
Terrific. I tell you what, I'm going to go the opposite way. If they don't challenge the single season record and if they don't utilize their best weapons, their wide receivers, their tight ends, their quarterback, then I don't want to say you can bludgeon me with an actual hammer because that would really hurt. But maybe we'll get one of those plastic Nerf hammers, and I'll just come on here and I'll just do this nonstop the entire podcast, just keep smashing myself in the head because that's what I'll feel like if they don't utilize all their best talent next year. And this is a defining moment for Jim Harbaugh and for this coaching staff and for this program. I'm tired of saying wait till next year. I'm tired of saying they need this time and that time. And I'm tired of comparing it to Dabo Swinney needed this or Mark D'Antonio needed that. Because you know what's going to happen here pretty soon, Steve, is we're going to get to a point where you can't. There's nothing that you can throw out there like, oh well, it took Dabo Swinney 7 years to get Clemson this point, and we're in year 8 with Michigan. Or it took Mark D'Antonio. Well, guess what? We passed the point where it took Mark D'Antonio to win a Big Ten title, so we can't use that one anymore. So what are we going to use? It's we keep on moving the goalposts further and further away to like, well, he needs more time for this. I'm done with the more time. Win now, or give me like $7 million back and just be a $2 million coach and nurture these kids and take them to Rome and do all the things you want to do, but stop earning an elite coach's paycheck, because you just ain't if you don't win this year with what you have coming back and with the fact that you're in year 5.
Michael Spath, WTK Ann Arbor, Wolverine Digest. Good to see you, Michael. Go Blue. Talk to you next week.
All right. Enjoy the game tonight. Hopefully a big night for Michigan basketball.
Indeed. Take care, man. If you like what we do here, WolverineDigest.com is the website. We update it frequently with commentary. If you don't want to wait until Tuesday and when a new episode gets unveiled each week, keep updated each and every week at WolverineDigest.com. Both myself and Michael Spath from WTKA and Ann Arbor write commentary there each and every day. WolverineDigest.com. This week's Twitter poll results, we asked you, what do you think Michigan's final Big Ten basketball record will be? Number one answer would actually be the answer I would give. 46% of you think Michigan loses 2 more games and finishes 16-4, just eking out over 41% of you who thought the Wolverines will lose just once more and finish 17-3. 13% of you combined thought the Wolverines would finish 15-5 or 14-6. That's a good segue to our question of the week this week. Sam Johnston asks, how likely do you think it is for Purdue to run the table and win the Big Ten championship? They don't play either Michigan squad again. I don't think there's almost any chance Purdue will run the table. I don't. Even though tonight against Maryland would be their, as it stands now, their only remaining road game against a ranked team. They still have a road game at Indiana as an in-state rival, a road game at Ohio State. Guys, road games at Illinois, ask Michigan State. Road games at Rutgers. There aren't any nights off in this league. Okay, so if you look at how much better personnel Michigan has after you get past, Carson Edwards, probably, if you were to stack Michigan and Purdue up, like the next 6 best players would probably all be from Michigan. That aside, even a school like Michigan is going to lose 3, 4, 5 games when this is all said and done. There aren't any nights off in this league. So do I think Purdue could maybe share the Big Ten championship with a Michigan? Sure. Do I think they're going to win out? I don't think there's much of a chance of that, actually. Want to thank our friends at Detroit Sports Podcast for helping to spread the word about Michigan Podcast each week. Make sure you click subscribe and give us a 5-star review there on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, your podcast platform of choice. Give us a like and a subscribe right here on YouTube. A lot of you ask us, again, what can we do to help you out besides supporting us on Patreon? As we mentioned earlier, you can also spread the word. Share the link to this podcast, this broadcast here on YouTube each and every week. Until next week, go Blue.